Somewhere between the glow of the Kremlin's towers and the echo of distant engines, modern equipment once hailed as untouchable began to falter. What happens when a fortress built on pride learns that silence can be shattered by wings no larger than a suitcase? For centuries, power was defined by iron, by missiles and banners, by the roar of parades across Red Square. But tonight, that image burns. From the outer ring roads to the very heart of the capital, explosions bloom like unnatural flowers, and with each pulse of light, the illusion of safety fades. Because this is not just a strike, it is a warning. The age of distance is over. The age of noise has arrived. Subscriber, not for spectacle, but for understanding. Because behind every explosion lies the truth of how modern warfare reshapes the world we live in. The first explosions tore through the quiet like thunder rolling across the centuries. In a moment, the city of marble and memory became a trembling mosaic of glass and flame. From the high-rise apartments along Kutuzovsky Avenue to the narrow alleys near the Moskva River, shockwaves rattled windows, setting off car alarms that screamed into the night. People rushed to balconies, half-dressed, clutching their children, their faces caught between disbelief and dread. Emergency sirens wailed from every direction. Fire trucks weaved through debris-strewn streets, their red lights painting the smoke in violent color. The sound of engines was joined by something far stranger, the hum of unseen wings above. Tiny, deliberate, unfeeling. They moved with a rhythm too precise to be human, guided by algorithms and remote intent. Through the haze, the once gleaming skyline of Moscow flickered like a dying constellation. Plumes of fire rose where the drones had struck, an office tower here, a power substation there, each blast cutting deeper into the illusion that the capital was immune to the war it had exported. Inside one of the shelters beneath the Arbat district, an elderly man whispered, "It feels like the 40s again." The younger ones did not answer. They had no memory of that timer only the glowing screens in their hands showing new images of fear. Videos spread faster than the smoke. Flames danced across social feeds, captions whispering, "It's here." For decades, Moscow had watched war from afar, its leaders promising strength and its citizens believing distance was safety. But tonight, distance died. The city's heartbeat quickened under the weight of its own history. As dawn approached, the horizon glowed not with sunrise, but with the reflection of burning steel. The air carried a metallic taste, sharp and bitter. From above, it looked almost beautiful, a choreography of fire and silence. But down below, it was chaos. Firefighters battling infernos, mothers shielding children from glass, police shouting orders no one could hear. And, through it all, the hum continued. Cold, mechanical, relentless. The sound of a new era taking shape above the ruins of the old. The attack was not chaos, it was choreography. From the black earth, planes beyond the horizon, clusters of uncrewed aerial vehicles rose into the night like flocks of steel crows. They were small, quick, and deceptively simple. But together, they formed an intelligence greater than any single pilot could command. It was the swarm, a storm of code and carbon fiber. These modern military equipment were designed not to overpower, but to overwhelm. Each drone carried just enough explosives to wound, not to obliterate. Their true weapon was numbers, the ability to stretch an entire city's defenses until the seams tore. Some flew high, flashing against the moonlight. Others skimmed the rooftops, using the heat of burning cars to mask their signatures. They came from every direction at once, a three-dimensional puzzle that even Moscow's proud radar network could not solve. Inside the command bunkers, Russian operators watched their screens fill with hundreds of signals. Every flicker could be a bird, a decoy, or death. The Tsar 400 batteries roared to life, launching interceptors worth hundreds of thousands of dollars against drones that cost less than a family car. Each launch lit the sky with a spiral of flame, a spectacle of power fighting to stay relevant. Analysts would later call it a chess match in the air. Each drone's movement forced a reaction, draining both resources and composure. When the swarm reached its midpoint, communication networks began to falter. Electronic jamming severed the link between ground stations and radars, creating blind zones where silence was deadlier than noise. In one of those blind zones, 6 drones slipped through. Their paths were autonomous, their guidance systems adjusted in real time to the electric pulse of the city. One veered toward a fuel depot, another toward a telecommunications tower. The explosions that followed were smaller than missiles, but far more surgical wounds instead of amputations, meant to bleed morale rather than flesh. By the time the radar screens cleared, it was too late. The swarm had already melted into the night, leaving only trails of smoke and a question hanging over the capital: how do you defend against what you cannot predict? These modern military equipment, once the pride of 21st century warfare, had rewritten the rules overnight. The balance between cost and consequence was inverted. The battlefield had shrunk, and now even the sky above a sleeping city was part of it. When the last wave of drones vanished into the night, silence did not return. It lingered, uneasy, alive, full of static. The physical attack had ended, but a new kind of assault had begun, one that struck the human heart. Across Moscow, sleepless eyes stared through cracked windows into the glowing sky. Smoke rose like a dark flag above the city, a reminder that the walls which once defined safety had dissolved overnight. The psychological front had shifted. War was no longer a distant echo on the television. It was the trembling of the floor beneath one's feet. In an underground station, converted into a shelter, families huddled together on cold tiles. Mothers whispered to children, "It's over," though they did not believe their own words. Men paced the corridors, gripping their phones, searching for news that would make sense of the chaos. But the networks were faltering, the lines of communication fractured by the same invisible waves that had guided the drones. Outside, firefighters battled burning vehicles under the pale orange haze. A young volunteer removed his mask for a moment and whispered to his partner, "It feels like the city is breathing smoke instead of air." His words drifted upward into the night, joining the sirens and the cries. The fear was not in the explosions, it was in the waiting. Every gust of wind sounded like another engine. Every shadow on the wall looked like an approaching drone. People learned to flinch at silence because silence was only the pause before the next sound. Psychologists call it anticipatory trauma, the exhaustion of expecting disaster at any moment. But no term could capture the deeper wound, the sense of betrayal. Moscow was supposed to be the fortress of a vast nation, its heart wrapped in steel and certainty. Yet tonight, the mighty heart had skipped a beat. These modern military equipment can intercept missiles across continents, a commentator had once said proudly on state television. But no one had spoken of the mind, of how fragile it becomes when the sky itself turns hostile. In the days that followed, shops reopened and trains resumed their routes. Yet the rhythm had changed. People walked faster, spoke softer, looked upward more often. Fear had become part of the architecture, invisible but ever-present. And somewhere in the quiet corners of the city, amid the smoke-stained windows and melted street lamps, an old truth stirred again. Every war begins with weapons, but it ends within the human spirit. Long after the smoke had settled, the war continued, and no longer in the skies, but in the sentences. Screens flickered, headlines appeared and vanished, and the truth became just another battlefield. Official broadcasts opened the morning with calm voices. No major damage. Defenses successful. Life in the capital remains normal. Yet outside, the scent of burnt metal lingered in the air, and glass still crunched under the soles of passing boots. The contradiction was unbearable. The city had seen fire, but was told to feel peace. Within hours, social media began to fracture under the pressure. Videos of explosions, uploaded by ordinary citizens, started disappearing one by one. Some users found their accounts locked, others received quiet warnings, delete or be investigated. For the first time, people realized that words could be as dangerous as shrapnel. In cramped offices beneath the Ministry of Information, teams worked through the night, rewriting the story. The strategy was simple: drown the memory of fear in the noise of confidence. Replace every flame with reassurance, every explosion with an echo of control. It was a war of tone, fought not with missiles, but with measured sentences. Journalists whispered among themselves, careful even inside their own rooms. Some tried to report what they saw, others chose silence, self-preservation disguised as professionalism. The walls of newsrooms felt closer each day. The battle now, one editor confided, is between the truth we know and the truth we're allowed to say. But the internet has its own gravity. Even as posts were deleted, fragments reappeared elsewhere, mirrored, reposted, rephrased. The digital tide could be delayed, never stopped. Clips of fire and panic continued to circle the world, carrying a new question across borders. If Moscow could burn, what city was safe? These modern military equipment had failed to intercept not just the drones, but the information itself. Data had become the new shrapnel langs, small, invisible, and impossible to contain. For citizens still sweeping glass from their windows, the censorship felt like another kind of attack, the denial of what their own eyes had witnessed. A grandmother in Zamoskvorechye was overheard saying, "They can silence the news, but they cannot silence the noise." And perhaps she was right. Every war leaves behind two kinds of ruins, the physical and the moral. When the first can be rebuilt faster than the second, victory is only an illusion. In the end, the fires that burned across the skyline were not as bright as the ones now flickering across the screens. 1,000 silent rebellions glowing in the dark. By the following dawn, the smoke had thinned, but the questions had thickened. Moscow still stood, but not the same Moscow that had fallen asleep the night before. The towers were unbroken, yet something invisible had cracked: belief. For generations, the city's skyline had symbolized certainty, the granite confidence of a state that claimed to command the future. Now, beneath that same skyline, people walked slower, spoke quieter, and looked upward as if expecting the sky to betray them again. The night of drones had not destroyed the capital's defenses, it had destroyed its assumptions. In the days that followed, government channels repeated the same refrain, all under control. But control is a fragile illusion, held together by repetition. When the truth is whispered more often than it is broadcast, it becomes heavier than any official declaration. Inside the marble corridors of power, officials traded reports in hushed tones. Some spoke of technical failures, others of intelligence leaks. A few, braver than most, spoke of fear. They did not fear the next strike, but the realization that their fortress of technology, these modern military equipment, proud and gleaming, could be undone by the will of a few determined minds and machines smaller than eagles. Economists counted the cost, generals drafted new protocols, and diplomats shaped new narratives for the outside world. Yet nothing could mend the invisible fracture spreading through the population, the sense that power, once lost even for a second, might never be whole again. At a cafe near the garden ring, two engineers spoke quietly over tea. "Do you think it will happen again?" one asked. The other smiled faintly. "It already has, just not in the air." He was right. The second strike was psychological, a quiet contagion of doubt. It seeped into conversations, into classrooms, into boardrooms. It was the look exchanged between colleagues when the sirens tested at noon, the unspoken thought that even the strongest walls could echo. These modern military equipment could intercept missiles, but not mistrust. They could silence the roar of engines, but not the whisper of fear. Somewhere, beyond the noise of politics, beyond the machinery of propaganda, ordinary citizens began to ask themselves a forbidden question. If Moscow could tremble, then what of us? The collapse of certainty does not arrive with explosions, it arrives with silence. A silence so heavy that even the truth struggles to move beneath it. And in that silence, the age of arrogance gives way to the age of awareness. When the last flame was extinguished and the smoke curled into dawn, Moscow stood a changed but standing. The city had survived the night, yet its heartbeat was different, slower, heavier, aware. The war had not destroyed its buildings, it had stripped away its illusions. Once, the world measured power by missiles and monuments. Now, it is measured by resilience, the unseen courage to confront vulnerability. The night of drones proved that even the greatest capitals can be humbled, not by invasion, but by revelation. Every empire has its moment of awakening, the instant when strength must look itself in the mirror and recognize fragility. For Moscow, that moment came with the whir of propellers, the glow of fire across the river, and the haunting silence that followed. Modern military equipment can defend borders, but not beliefs. Military equipment can destroy threats, but not the fear that lingers afterward. And military equipment alone can never shield the human spirit from the cost of pride. Across the world, strategists will study this night, generals will draw new lines on their maps, and analysts will speak of swarm tactics and electronic warfare. Yet for the people who lived it, the memory will be simpler. The sound of sirens replacing dreams, the light of fires illuminating the truth that had always been there, that no city, no power, no leader is beyond reach. Perhaps that is the final lesson of modern conflict. The front line is no longer a place, it is a state of mind. It moves with every signal, every whisper, every doubt. And in that shifting terrain, the bravest act left to humanity is not conquest, but understanding. So as the ashes cool and the sky clears, one thought remains for all who watch this night unfold. Peace. Freedom. Buys. In the dead calm before dawn, the sky above Moscow flickered like a broken heartbeat. Sirens howled through the frozen air as if the city itself had woken from a dream of invincibility.